All right, Jesse, welcome to the Dale Stark Show. Thanks for coming out, brother.
Happy to be here, Dale. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, man. Well, I am a little bit disappointed that you came out just because I feel a little bit overshadowed by your powerful mustache today. I don't know when that happened, but it seems to have you've overtaken the master. Like, what happened there?
I think you might have shaved a little too much off of yours. You got to keep working on that.
Yeah, tough competition in the airline
living out
industry.
here in the woods, Grizzly Adams.
Yeah. Good stuff, man. So what I wanted to talk to you about, among other things, is that one, you are a major airline captain now.
Yep.
And we both kind of grew up similarly and both enlisted crew chiefs. And then when I went the military pilot route, you went the civilian pilot route. So we can now kind of come back and talk about some of the positives and negatives of each of those routes for anyone that might be interested in becoming a pilot and they're not sure which way to go.
Yeah.
So anyhow, so tell me a little bit about what it was like for you growing up.
Yeah, I mean, I grew up, basically we mostly lived in trailer parks and moved around a lot. We're on welfare. My mom was a single mom for most of my life till I was about 12 when she married my stepdad, who's still around. He was there for a lot of those like later teenage years when when life gets teenagers start testing their parents. So
Wait, I thought all airline captains had like trust funds and that's how they got their training.
Man,
How is this possible?
honestly, like I never even thought of flying as a something I could do as a kid growing up. It wasn't until I was about 18 and I got a job at the airport with this small airline that started flying into my hometown. And we kind of did all things with fueled airplanes. We would marshal them in, offload bags, load bags. It was a one-stop shop for the little airline that came in. But through that, I started interacting with some pilots and basically realized like not all of them did have that trust fund. And at that time, those guys weren't making money either. Like, honestly,
like the regional guys.
Yeah, these guys were like living in their own trailers and trying to like make ends meet so that they could eventually get to the big airline job. And so it was kind of inspirational to me to be like, well, maybe I could do that. And there was kind of a switch that flipped in my mind, deciding that like I could potentially do something like that, because up until that point, been a pretty horrible student, skipped a lot of class, was down at the beach surfing all the time. I actually dropped out of school for a whole year during my junior year.
I was going to say, when I met you, you were like 15 or 16, I think.
Yeah.
And you lived in an apartment by yourself and you didn't go to school. And we're going like, okay, what the heck is going on here?
Like I said, my home life was interesting, and I left home at 16. Thought I could make it on my own, which I was able to, but at the same point, I was kind of going down like a dead end road. And it wasn't until I met you and Mike and, our friends that we still surf with today, that when you guys started graduating high school, that I realized, I need to do something with my life too. Like surfing and working at fast food restaurants is probably not a good means to an end. So
remember when we would talk you into quitting so we could go surf? We'd like show up at Wendy's and be like, dude, quit right now. The surf is firing.
There were so many times when, I'm probably one of the worst was my buddy told me that there was waves going off of like a 3-hour drive away from where we live. And I was supposed to do the opening shift that morning, and I left a note and put it on the front door and bailed surfing all day.
Wait, was that your quit? How you quit?
I didn't quit. I was just like, hey, I'm not going to be here.
Yeah, pre-cell phones, right?
Yeah. Well, needless to say, I got fired from that job. they were not happy with the way I handled that. But
that's so funny.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, we surfed a ton. That was such a fun time of our lives.
It was a good time.
Just poor Mike's parents like paying for all of our food because it was like centrally located in town.
Yes.
Okay, so you like I always remember though when you went back to school, like when we did go to school together,
Right.
it seemed really easy for you. Like was that always the case? Like you were getting straight A's and I was getting like D's and F's and we're in the same classes and I never understood how you did that.
Yeah, I always felt like I was kind of like smarter than most, but I never applied myself. And so, because I was skipping school and not really, like, I just wasn't getting good grades, not doing homework, not, but like when test time came around, I'd always tested well. And so, like, I could kind of keep up. But man, like, we did, like, my first year of college with you, and I remember we had a couple classes together, and that was when I had already made the switch in my mind whether I was going to apply myself and do well, and I got like straight A's that first semester of school, and I was like, wow, I can if I just go to class. Like,
did you graduate high school or did you get a GED?
No, I did graduate high school.
Okay,
so I went back and
so you just took a year off, I
took a year off
sabbatical.
And I went back my senior year, and we had this program. It was, what did they call it? It was like an alternative school.
Okay.
And so you could kind of like, almost like test out of classes. Like you had to do a certain amount of work, and then you could take a test. And then it was like, okay, you got that credit. And so I was doing that half time and then going to regular school the other half, just to get like a couple of classes that were going to be a little more challenging out of the way. And yeah, so through that, I still managed to graduate on time with my graduating class. And and then as soon as I finished that, I was like applying for flight school because I knew I wanted to fly. But it was like soon after that, I realized like money was going to be an issue. Like there's no way I'm going to pay for this working. At that point, I had an airline job, throwing bags.
It's like a baggage handler.
Yeah. And God, I want to say at the time it was maybe $10-11 an hour part-time. Like it wasn't, it seemed like it was enough to like get by, but it was not enough to like pay.
You're doing the math in your head going like, okay, how's this gonna work for me?
Right. So that was about the time we were both, looking at enlisting because we were like, kind of realized we needed college to, well, for one, to be a military pilot, you needed a 4-year degree. You realize that. And for me, I wanted to fly airplanes, and that's a very expensive. I want to say you're spending, 50, 60 grand minimum just to get through any of those programs. And like, how are you going to get that kind of money? Well, the GI Bill was a good way. So.
Right. And then, so I enlisted before you, right? Like just a few months.
Yeah.
And what was so you went to the Guard, right? The Guard first, or was it the reserves?
Well, so it's a funny story. You enlisted, and I was talking with the same recruiter you were here in North Bend, and the guy, you shipped out, and basically, well, like 7 weeks later, you got to your first tech school, and you said there's all these guys here that get to go home when they're done, and I'm like, what do you mean, like? And he said, well, there's this thing called the Air National Guard, and it's like the same job as the Air Force, but like they can go to school full time. And I'm like, no way. He's like, we both knew like Army National Guard, but that just wasn't our thing. And so yeah, I started looking into it, and sure enough, we had the Oregon Air Guard up in Portland. They flew F-15s, and I called the recruiter up there, and he saw that I was, or found out that I was enlisting to go active duty, and kind of showed me their side of it. It was like, okay, well, here's a guaranteed job. Like, you want to be a crew chief, like you're gonna get that position if you sign up today, and you're gonna get the GI Bill, the way you would if you would, but you can start using it right away versus completing 4 years of active duty, and then going to school. And I was all about like, I want to get into school as soon as possible. So
Yeah, now that you bring that up, I remember that conversation. I remember I'm sitting in my dorm. I've got like my roommate next to me,
right.
and I'm looking at this path ahead of me going,
Yeah.
like, man, I wish I knew about the guard. And like to this day, I still tell people about the guard.
I
And
do
it was
too.
such a good deal.
Yeah, it is. It is.
And even if you want to be a military pilot, you can obviously go straight to the guard
Yeah.
or the reserves. And you just have so much more control over your life. You don't necessarily have to say yes to everything.
Yeah. Which, I mean, funny story is I used the guard to get me through school, which come the end of my enlistment, which I enlisted for 6 years with them. I had a 4-year degree. I had a flying job. I had all the requirements needed to actually apply to be a pilot in my unit, or any unit for that matter. I decided that since I was already flying for the airlines, I kind of achieved that goal and that path, that there was another restriction. I remember Portland Air Guard pilots have to live within a 50-mile ring of the airport, and that was too far away from the beach for me.
Right, huge problem.
I was still like big into surfing, and I just couldn't see sacrificing my beach time for a flying job that seemed really cool, but I don't know.
Yeah, I think people kind of have a intuition of what they want to do.
Yeah.
And it's like, you may be enticed one way or another,
Right.
but I knew from day one, you always wanted to be like a major airline pilot.
Yeah.
So where'd you get your undergrad at?
Kind of split up between, so I went to a flight school in New Mexico. It was a 2-year program. I ended up getting my associate's degree there, and a flying job out of it. It was, at the time, through Mesa Airlines, which was a small regional. So after I finished that degree, I started with the airline, and I knew the major airlines were requiring an undergrad bachelor's, and so I enrolled in it was called Utah Valley University, and it was just an online program.
Just kind of like pay the fee, get a B.
Yeah, well,
deal.
I mean, they actually gave a lot of credit towards flying. So each of your flight certificates was worth credits and work experience. So, not only did I have my associates already, so I had 2 years of schooling done, but I probably got like another year done just in work experience. So I had to put together another year of school, and it took me about 2 more years because, I couldn't go full time and work a full time job. But
Where were you working at this time?
so I was working for Mesa Airlines, and I had
Okay.
I was based in Chicago, and I was commuting from here to work out there. So there's just a lot goes into that. It's like I'm about to go fly a 4-day trip. Typically, probably flying out the day before your trip starts. You finish it, you might be able to catch like the last flight home. And so, you'd be gone 4 or 5 days trying to do homework on your layovers.
Yeah.
But it was all manageable. That's why I didn't take like a full load, taking like 2 classes at a time.
Sure.
And,
I want to back up just a little bit
Sure.
and get in a little deeper about the flight school.
Okay.
Okay, because I was off in the Air Force at that time.
Yeah,
And we still stayed in touch. We've stayed in touch forever, but I kind of miss like the intricacies of what that was like.
Right.
So like, because the GI Bill is not going to pay for your entire flight training, are they? It's like a certain amount.
Yeah, I want to say it paid for about half.
Okay.
Yeah, it was a significant amount. Flight school is still really expensive. I ended up taking out student loans. It was like $60,000, which was about half. I want to say if I was paying for it all on my own, it would have been 120.
And what year was this?
And this would have been in 2003
Okay.
when I started. So I had graduated from there in 05 with $60,000 in debt.
Yeah, I remember thinking that seemed so crazy at the
Yeah.
time. And then now you're a captain. It doesn't seem like nearly as big of a deal.
I always tell people that are considering going to the flight school, it is a significant amount of debt to take out. Like if that's the path you want to go, there's all sorts of ways to get to where I'm at. But the debt or the job, I guess, the end result justifies the debt. So it's a good paying job, and you're going to be able to make those payments and get that burden off your back at some point.
Yeah, if you end up with like a gender studies degree and $120,000 in debt, you're probably going to have problems. But
There's a lot of degrees out there that I kind of cringe at for people taking out debt, because I'm like, what job are you going to have that's going to justify that money? But
yeah, if you don't have a plan, it doesn't make sense.
yeah.
But if you do have a plan, then I think you're well served to do what you did, because obviously making $10 an hour throwing bags isn't going to get you where you want to go.
Right.
And no one's going to pay for it for you.
Yeah.
And you can't necessarily just like work your way through it. So
Yeah.
I think it makes a lot of sense in that case. I guess the biggest risk would be if you invest all this money and then something happens, like medically, and you're not able to do the job.
Yeah, like, some people get overwhelmed with flight training and can't complete it. Like, you still took out that debt. Like, it's going to be hard to repay that.
So what did that program take you through, like training and certification wise? Like, did you start with the private pilots already, or was that everything all the way through commercial or ATP, or how did that work?
So I basically started with 0 hours, showed up on day one. First semester was private pilot. And, it was like, we had a full load of coursework. One of the classes was basically a ground school for private pilot. And then a bunch of like your typical, like, fundamental courses. There's a math course in there, science, writing. And so doing that, and then you're flying too. So we would, you'd have scheduled probably fly, 4 or 5 days a week. I remember I probably soloed within 2 or 3 weeks of being there. And then, a semester is 16 weeks. And so you're knocking out a lot of hours and then taking a check ride. And that's one of your grades on your, so.
Was it stressful, like pretty tough?
I don't think the pace to me didn't seem very stressful. I remember feeling like ahead of it. I just had a lot of fun with it. I think, flying in the Southwest is unique. There's a lot of cool things to see while you're flying around there. There's a lot of really good weather days. So you can almost just bank on being able to go to the airport and fly almost every day, which is something they marketed, that school. They said, we got 350 days of good flying a year. And I'm like, that's a lot.
Yeah, it's like that's why they put Embry-Riddle out in Prescott. Huh?
Exactly. So, yeah, it was, like I said, flying 4 or 5 days a week. It seemed, and then there was like sim time on the side, so you'd be kind of like continually building your skills. And then, so private was semester 1, instrument was a whole nother semester. And then we roll into like, I think the commercial and the multi were like kind of combined. So it was like commercial. It's pretty easy. I think it's mainly like time building. And then for the check ride is just a few maneuvers that are like more precise than you did them as a private pilot. The tolerances are lower. Instead of like 100 feet of altitude loss, you have to be within 50 feet. So it's just like tighter parameters there. And then, then the multi is basically all that same stuff, but in a twin engine aircraft. And then, so that's through 3 semesters. And then the 4th semester was very unique to this program. They had, we were the first, my class was the first semester to they had bought a CRJ, a regional jet simulator, and had it on campus. And we went through the entire systems ground school that they teach at the airline in a 2-week period. We did it over a whole semester. So we really dove into the systems of the CRJ, programming the FMS, learning how to flip all the switches, learning all the flows that the pilots do. When they show up for work, you jump into a cold, dark jet, and you have to go through this procedure to turn it on. And we learned all that as students at this flight school. And so the goal was to leave this flight school and then go straight to the CRJ at this point. Prior to us, it was a Beech 1900, which is a smaller turboprop.
And what's the CRJ for the audience?
CRJ is, there's 3 versions. It's a Canada Air regional jet, a 50-seat version. They have a 70-seat and a 90-seater, which is just a big stretched out. But yeah, it was a great experience.
I think I remember in that time, actually, I just had a flashback of I was flying the T-34.
Correct.
And you were going through your training, and I was explaining to you how to do a barrel roll. Did you ever do a barrel roll in that program?
Undeniable.
Plead the fifth.
Plead the fifth. But I had some good knowledge on how to perform that maneuver.
Oh, good answer.
Yeah.
Probably a safe answer while you're still flying. Okay.
I remember, though, because the T-34, what you were flying was basically the same airplane I was flying. I was flying a Bonanza, which yours was basically a Bonanza with a turboprop motor. And we were kind of on similar. We were going through like the instrument at the same time. And I remember you like calling me, like, I'm having a problem like figuring out these holds. And I was just like, I had just figured it out, I remember. And I'm like, oh yeah, like, well, it's this, there's the teardrop. And like, I had this method of teaching it. And I think you like kind of had
I remember those
clicked
conversations.
for you, and you're like, oh yeah, okay, like, I think I got it now.
That makes sense.
But it was funny because our paths were very similar up until that point. I think right after instrument, you started doing aerodynamic or acrobatics and formation flying, and I'm like, oh, I wish I could do that stuff.
You just go to like smooth as possible flying,
exactly.
And we start diverging there a little bit. Yeah, that's interesting. So back then, you needed a commercial license to go to a regional.
Yeah.
So now you need an ATP, so an airline transport pilot certificate, which requires 1,500 hours of flight training, I believe, or flight time.
Yes.
And so do they still have programs like that funnel you straight into the cockpit, or how's it work now?
I want to say most programs lead you through to be a flight instructor, and then you flight instruct to get
at the school?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Actually, my son, Austin, he is 23 right now, and he is looking at one of these programs. And we've been having this conversation a lot lately. And I'm like, it's a lot of money. You gotta complete the program, or it's not worth it. But so the program he's looking at does it. It gets you through in about a year. Getting all your certificates, and then you would flight instruct for probably 1 or 2 more years to get the rest of those hours to get that ATP. But I've got a friend, he's just finishing up that program. He's like 100 hours away from his ATP, and he's already got 3 job offers.
Yeah.
I mean, it is a longer road now, but the benefits, the actual job pays more now than it did in my day. So I did get hired. I flew the CRJ with 250 hours. Was my first airline job, but I was making $20 an hour.
And that's like actual flight time, right?
Yeah,
So you're
and
not getting
I
paid.
think people don't realize like, oh, $20 an hour, especially in 2005, like sounded like a pretty good job. And maybe it was if you were working full time, but they don't pay us 40 hours a week. They actually only pay you the hours that you're flying.
So you're not getting paid in the airport. You're not getting paid for ground ops.
Right.
You're not getting paid for anything
all
until you
that
are airborne.
Time away from home, like
That's so crazy. It's like slave labor.
Right. And yeah, funny story is there were guys that went to like the welfare office in their pilot uniforms. And everybody thought they were joking until they showed them their W-2 or their pay stub, and they're like, "Wait a second, like."
Yeah.
Because the reality is, we're legally only allowed to fly 100 hours a month per the FAA for rest requirements. So, like 100 hours a month, that's a hard month of flying. So averaging 80 hours is more typical. But at $20 an hour, it's basically a part-time job.
Part-time job. Yeah. Yeah. And the way they looked at it back then, as far as I understood, was that you were kind of just putting in your time and you're not paying anymore to get that experience.
Right.
So you can get your 1,500 hours, your ATP certificate, and then go to bigger and better things.
Yeah. They're definitely taking advantage of the kids that knew like this was a means to an end. You know, it's like, I got to put my time in here. You know, at the time it was 3 to 5 years maybe at the regional before you could get that major airline job. And then you were, you know, financially getting more stable at that point. But yeah.
Do you remember that mishap? Is it Cologne Air? I forget what the name of it. It was
Colgan.
Colgan, yeah.
Yes.
I was like, it rang a bell. I couldn't.
Yes.
It's not something I was too familiar with, but I remember there was in the mishap investigation, there were all these contributing factors, and they're just like, these guys are way too inexperienced, and they should not be flying passengers, and that's when they upped the requirements, right?
They blamed a lot of it on that, but they also blamed a lot of it on the pay, because I remember the first officer was commuting to work, and it was a long day. I remember it was like, you know, flew from the West Coast to the East Coast to start a trip, then flew all day, and then, you know, that crash happened like at the end of it was like really late, dark, rainy. And they're just tired. Is a reality.
They work you like a dog in those jobs, right?
So in like, you know, because of the pay, you know, getting paid $20-$30 an hour, whatever, they were getting paid, couldn't afford to, you know, have your own apartment, live in base. You know, some people do make the sacrifice and move to where they are. But, you know, I want to say they're Boston based. You know, a lot of those East Coast cities are just really expensive, and it's hard to kind of.
You're not living in Boston on $20 an hour, right?
Yeah, she was still living at home with her parents. It was the reality. So it's like,
that's so sad.
Yeah, that's part of it. But yeah, they did contribute a lot of that crash to the inexperience, and it drove a lot of them changing the rules from having that commercial certificate to get the job to now you need the ATP. So another, you know, 1,200 hours of flying. However you get that, flight instructing typically. There are some other jobs out there.
Towing banners.
Yeah, you know, because a commercial certificate allows you to now get paid to fly, but like the jobs that pay you to fly with the commercial aren't the greatest. You know, aerial photography. You know, you're making $20 an hour maybe.
Yeah. Okay. So that reminds me of something, and it kind of deterred me from the airlines. It was something called the crash pad.
Okay.
So explain this lifestyle.
Few in my life.
Yeah. Explain the lifestyle of a young commuting airline pilot in these crash pads that exist throughout the country.
Yeah. I just left mine 2 years ago.
In
I
Portland?
I had to rejoin a crash pad when I upgraded to captain because I was on reserve. So reserve at my airline was a 2-hour call out, and so you have to be within 2 hours of the airport. And so the only way to pull that off and still live here is to have a crash pad.
Okay, what's a crash pad?
So my crash pad was a 3-bedroom apartment with 4 bunks in each room. So a total of 12 beds. And each person that's staying there is paying $300 a month. And all of them are crew members. And typically, we're not all there at the same time. If you are, it's a pretty crowded house. But yeah, honestly, average was like 2 to 4 of us there at the same time.
And you have your own bed though, right? You're not having to share your bed when you're not there.
There are ones they call hot beds where
it's like Navy shit here.
Exactly. So yeah, but it's a place to sleep and shower. You got a kitchen to make food. Yeah, I lived with there were 10 flight attendants and 2 pilots. So
I'll just leave that one alone. It's a lot of sacrifice.
Yeah.
Like, especially if you don't want to move around
Right.
to live in domicile, right? Like, it's just part of it.
It's part of it. Yeah.
So at this time, like, how much time are you gone and how much time are you home? Like, what's your lifestyle like?
Like now?
No, like back in.
And then? Yeah. When I was commuting to Chicago, I was, man, I feel like I would kind of bunch my trips together. So I do like a 4-day, maybe have a day off in Chicago and then do another 4-day and then, come home for like a week and then go back out and kind of do that again. So try to do like a week on, week off, or maybe 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off, something like that. You can kind of manipulate your schedule to accommodate a lot of that. But yeah, it's depending on where you're commuting to, it can be a lot of time at work and not as much time at home.
Yeah, every guy or gal I've talked to that talks about the airlines says if you can live in domicile, it's almost like 2 different jobs.
Yeah.
Like because then you don't need the crash pad. If you're on a 2-hour call out, you're at home.
Right.
But who wants to live in like Chicago, especially if you're a surfer or established in your community? You don't necessarily want to leave, right?
Yeah. There's a lot of people that are flexible and want to just follow the job, but it's not for everyone. That's for sure.
So how did you get out of regional flying?
Well, I'll say that my time at the regionals was not all bad. I did a year based in Chicago, and then we had started this operation flying inter-island in Hawaii.
I remember that.
Yeah. And so, being a surfer, it was kind of like a dream come true for me. So I spent 2 years. I lived on Kauai, and I flew inter-island. I did move for that job.
Like, I'll live in domicile now.
Yeah.
You got me.
So, yeah, I kind of see that side of it where being home every night and literally being able to surf every day was kind of a dream come true. The only problem being was I was making like $30 an hour.
Living in Kauai.
But fortunately, like I always say this about Hawaii, it's like, yeah, Hawaii is expensive, but if all your activities are like just going to the beach and surfing, like it doesn't really cost that much to have a good time. So, groceries were a little more expensive, gas was a little more expensive, but like wasn't spending money going out to eat and doing a lot of things people do in the cities. So,
and what were you just flying inter-island at that time?
Yeah.
That'd be sweet. So.
Yeah, it was like, 6 hours. I'd show up at I like the evening shift. We had a morning 6 a.m. to 2 p.m. and then a 2 p.m. to 10. And so I basically surfed every morning, showed up at 2 o'clock, go fly my 8 legs, and then be back in in base at 10, go to sleep and wake up for
Do it
It
again.
was a pretty good life. Yeah.
Heck yeah.
Yeah. So,
Okay.
But yeah, to answer your question, after 3 years at the regional, I kind of had a couple opportunities present themselves. I could upgrade at the regional I was at. My number had just come up, and most likely I was going to be based somewhere back on the mainland, probably Chicago again. It was our junior base at the time. Or I had applied to fly for Aloha Airlines. And Aloha was out in Hawaii. I really loved my time in Hawaii and was trying to figure out a way to stay out there. And so Aloha had offered me an interview and offered me a job. And then I also had a interview with my buddy was going to fly for this cargo airline. They were called Southern Air, and they were flying 747s all over the world internationally. And their schedule seemed rough. It was like 20 on, 10 off. But I was like a bachelor at the time, and I was thinking, man, like 10 days off, but you could go wherever you wanted. And I was like, I'm just going to go on a surf trip like every month. And
Just live in Indonesia.
yeah, one of my buddies was a big surfer too, and we kind of both had the same idea. He was like, well, we'll take our 10 days and go to South Africa that time, and then go back to work, and then just bring a surfboard.
Surf J-Bay and
Yeah. So I ended up taking that job. It's kind of a little bit like chasing the heavy metal. Like there's at the time, FedEx and UPS wouldn't hire you without being able to check a box that said you had flown heavy international. So it was like kind of an opportunity to like check that box.
get your 747.
Yeah.
Check
type
out.
rating. And I figured at the time I might have gone and done it for like 2 or 3 years just to kind of like get some of that experience and move on. But ended up getting that job in 2008. And in 2009, I got laid off, and like the whole industry had kind of come to a crash.
Yeah, so this kind of correlates with the housing crisis and the
Yeah, exactly.
total economic downturn.
Yeah. So, my goal being to be at that airline for 2 years and move on to a major, kind of like was not going to happen.
Yeah.
No airlines were hiring, and most of them furloughed like a lot of guys and for a lot of years.
Yeah, the airlines are very volatile.
Yeah.
That's like, if you pay attention to it for long enough, you start to see that.
Yeah.
So we'll, let's take a quick break, and
Okay.
then we'll pick back up with your time at Southern Air.
Okay, cool. Sounds good.
Hey guys, I'd like to take a moment to thank our sponsors. First up is PapaBear Naturals. PapaBear makes all natural personal care products. So stuff like beef tallow balm, toothpaste, deodorant, and it's all without any of the chemical additives that you get with the mass-produced corporate stuff. And it's also sourced from local small ranches like this one. So check them out at papabearnaturals.com. Also like to thank Buffalo Wool Company. They make the best socks I've ever worn in my life. They're comfortable, they're breathable, they last, and they're all sourced with American buffalo wool and manufactured in America. So buffalowoolcompany.com, check them out. Also like to thank my Patreon supporters. $5, you can get the show early and ad-free. So without further delay, let's get back to the show. All right, so now you go. Now you're with Southern Air, which is a like international cargo company flying 747s.
Yep.
Is that right? So now you go from cruising around the islands, living the good life,
Yeah.
to being overseas all the time and doing 20-day trips. Like that's pretty brutal. Like, what was that phase of your life like?
It was interesting. I'll start with the training. I went from a pretty modern cockpit The CRJ, you know, is glass. It had good automation, like, and to like an old classic 747 with a 6-pack, and like
What's a 6-pack?
the 6-pack is your 6 main instruments that you know, typically are in your training aircraft, and you have to have this scan where you're, you know, looking at the attitude indicator and then looking at your airspeed, and you're looking at your altitude, and you're kind of your eyes are just all over the place all the time. It's a lot of work.
What was the autopilot like in that aircraft?
In the which one?
In the 7.4 with the steam gauges.
So yeah, it was good. It was a good autopilot. There was an upgrade in the sense that it had an auto throttle. The CRJ didn't have auto throttle. So there was another learning curve. Was like there was a point during my training where I didn't understand it, and I couldn't put together, you know, how to climb in this mode, and like how the two were talking to each other. And then one day it just clicked. I was like, oh, like basically at climb power, it's all the way forward and climb. And then, you know, basically it always plans to do an idle descent. So, you know, just wrapping your head around like a new feature of the airplane. But what the way they trained you to fly this airplane, because we went from, I went from a 2-man airplane to a 3-man. We had a flight engineer on the 747, and the flight engineer controlled a lot of the systems of the airplane. So he was in control of the hydraulics and the electrical system, like all that on his panel. So whenever there was a problem in the simulator, the response was every time disconnect the autopilot and hand fly. The first officer hand flies the airplane, talks to the air traffic control on the radios, while the captain and the flight engineer solve the problem together. So you kind of get tunnel vision in your, like I had lost my scan during those years flying the CRJ because it's all compacted onto one screen, and it's a lot easier. And we did a lot less hand flying. And so now coming back to this big, gigantic
Dinosaur.
airplane and having to relearn my old scan from the training days. And it was just like you would just zone in, and it was a big learning curve. I remember like Sim 5 was like, if I don't make it through this training, like I don't have a job. Like I already quit that job and lost my seniority number at that airline. So I'd have to
people
start
wash
over.
out of that program?
There were a few. Yeah, it was, you know, they were pretty good with the first officers, but they were really hard on captains. They expected the captains to be super sharp because they had to manage a lot of things. So the FO washout rate wasn't too bad, but the captains were a lot tougher. So
Yeah, that's a huge airplane. I remember seeing the first time up close and in person. You're like, dude, this thing is a beast.
Yeah, I remember the first time I ever saw one. I was traveling on a surf trip, and I was traveling through Amsterdam. And Amsterdam has this terminal with these big glass windows, and you can see like the whole airport. And you're like standing nose to nose with the 747, and you're just like, wow, like how does that thing get in the air? Like, and then to have the opportunity to actually fly it was kind of a treat, you know.
All right. So, and what's the lifestyle like flying for international cargo?
It was kind of strange. It was definitely a culture shock, you know, going from, you know, being home every night, you know, surfing with my friends to, you know, traveling with, they call them freight dogs. The freight dog culture is pretty toxic in my in my view. Like looking back, I was warned. My friend said, you know, if you want to come here, like he had flown cargo before, and he's like these guys are like party animals, and like, but I was at a weird place in my life where I was like, I didn't have a lot going on. Like I wasn't in a relationship, and I was kind of like excited for it a little bit. I was like, yeah, that'll be fun, you know, like travel the world with these guys and see all these things. And then, you know, like my goal was to like go on a surf trip like every month. But
Yeah, we linked up a few times. Like
that's true. Yeah.
in between assignments, we'd meet in Indonesia
Yeah.
and go surf.
I saw you at work.
Uluwatu.
I was, you know, on a trip to Korea and you were based there. And I was like, I'm going to go see Dale.
Yeah, that was fun. We went to Seoul.
Yeah. Yeah.
We got sushi. Yeah, that was an
Right.
That trip.
That's right.
Yeah, I kept seeing you all over the world. Like
Yeah.
that was pretty neat.
It was. Yeah. Interesting time though. That was right when I literally met my wife, Jen, who I'm still married to after all those crazy years. The like 2 days before I went to ground school for Southern Air. It was a really interesting time for me wanting to be a bachelor, planning to be a bachelor, taking this job to like meeting basically the love of my life and starting this job where I was going to be gone 20 days at a time. So, you know, the culture with the guys on the road is, like I said, pretty toxic. You know, guys would be grabbing beers on the way to the hotel from the airport.
Sounds like a fighter squadron.
It was like, yeah, planning on meeting up at this time to go close the bars down like every night. It was just a different world, man.
And is this seen as like a stepping stone to the majors, or what? Like, where does this fall in the hierarchy of the flying world, the civilian flying world?
I guess it depends on the age. Like for a younger guy like me, I was 28 at the time I got hired. It was seen as a stepping stone, but you see a lot of guys that make full careers out of it. And I feel like the guys that do either, you know, ended up there for whatever reason, and it's kind of like, it's almost like a trap. Like you can't get out of that type of flying once you start, unless you're, I guess, willing to take a risk. And it's like, because you're flying the bigger, heavier equipment, you're kind of making more money. And to go back to a major airline, even at the time, was like a big pay cut. I remember I had interviewed for Hawaiian Airlines a few years later and was like kind of dreading like actually getting the job, because I was making at the time maybe like $150 an hour, and starting pay at Hawaiian Airlines was $35 an hour. And I'm like, how am I going to pay my mortgage? Like, how am I going to get through that first year? Obviously, like, it pans out, you know, later, but you have to make some sacrifices along the way. So,
and the longer you're with them, probably the harder it is to start over.
So I remember guys in the cargo world, you know, saying, yeah, the majors is a nice job, but like there's a couple years of sacrifice there that they weren't willing to take, you know? And, but me being young was like, it's kind of a no-brainer. Plus, like I said, I wasn't really enthused about the culture there, you know?
Yeah.
It was fun being young and seeing the world, but it wasn't great for families. I saw a lot of good guys go through like divorces and, you know, break their families up. And it's like, I don't blame the women in their lives for that. It's like being able to, you know, watch your husband leave for 20 days is
every month.
Rough on
brutal.
a family. Yeah. So,
yeah, especially if it's forever.
Yeah.
If you're just like, this is my new life, you know,
Yeah.
It's not a stepping stone.
So,
and did you upgrade to captain there?
I did. Yeah. So like I said, I got furloughed in 2009. Fortunately, it was a short furlough. They called me back 6 months later, and about 6 months after that coming back, I was offered an upgrade. So been with the airline about 2 years, and I went to the left seat of the 747 and flew that for another 3 years as a captain, before the airline kind of went through another bankruptcy type thing. They started furloughing again, and I actually got pushed out of the airplane, and I flew the 777 as a first officer for a couple years after that. So
how old were you when you were a captain in the 747 flying international?
I was 30 years old.
Wow.
Yeah.
That had to be just a wild feeling.
Yeah, it was. I know when I got hired there were guys that were offered like basically street captain status. Like basically if you did well enough in training, they were growing so fast at the time that we're like, if you did well enough in training, you can be a captain right off the bat. And I remember a couple of guys that took that opportunity and telling me stories later of like some of the things they had to learn the hard way. You know, never flown over an ocean.
I wouldn't want to do that without doing in the right seat for a while.
Yeah,
no way.
Seeing it, like kind of experience it. That was my thing. It was like, well, if I do it for a few, you know, a couple months in the right seat and see it a few times, then maybe. But even then, I was the only reason I really felt comfortable was I knew how much experience we had sitting in the on the flight engineer panel. These guys were some of the most professional guys in the industry. A lot of older guys in their 60s, but they had flown as a flight engineer for years. A lot of them, we had guys that flew the Air Force One, guys that flew 747s for previous carriers, and as those airlines got rid of that, you know, would find their way into the cargo world. So we had a lot of experience at the flight engineer panel. And me knowing my job as a captain was to kind of take us from here to there. But if anything happens along the way, I have a really good person to work with.
Huge difference, huh?
To help me solve the problem, or we solve it together, you know. So,
you ever get yourself in a bad situation out there?
There were a few. Nothing like really crazy. We always talk about like a V1 cut, like an engine failure on takeoff. We had that happen one time.
In the 747?
In the 747. Wow. We were pretty heavy, but not like normally. Like sometimes we're super heavy, where it's like it barely wants to climb. And this day was just kind of fortunate in the sense that we weren't that heavy. We did have to end up, you know, the thing with 747's got 4 engines, so losing one, it almost doesn't change a lot. You know, you just got to add a little more rudder. You know, it climbs a little bit slower, but we still had plenty of power to get up, and we had to actually go dump fuel. We had to dump fuel for probably 40 minutes to get light enough to go back to the airport we had taken off from and land. So that happened once, but the craziest thing I think ever happened was we flew in Afghanistan a lot.
I remember that, yep.
And, you know, we always kind of knew in the back of our mind, like, yeah, we're probably being shot at, but like we would like flying into Bagram was interesting. I never saw it in the daytime. We always flew in there at night. We always flew in there with no lights on. So that.
Did you fly a special approach or just come in for a normal straight in or what?
I remember they would bring us in really high. Like we would kind of fly over the airport at like 20,000 feet. And then it would be like a scramble to get down. So it would be like full speed brake, idle, you know.
A rapid spiraling
descent. We'd kind of do this big like 270 degree turn and kind of roll out on final, join an ILS, and shoot the approach. But it was always
fun?
Scramble to get in there. Yeah, but it was all dark. So I didn't know where the mountains were or any of that. I knew just from looking at the approach plate that the terrain was off to the right side. So this one particular night, we're coming in and we were behind a C-130 who was on approach, and the C-130 called tracer fire, and they're like talking to tower, hey, we're being shot at, we're going missed approach. And so they go missed.
And you're
we're
right
like,
behind them.
We're right behind them. You know, we're like 5 miles in trail or whatever. And we're like, well, we're not seeing any of this. I was like, they must have night vision goggles.
Yes.
Like they see it all. And it's like, okay. So they told us just to hold in position. And so, yeah, we just leveled off and started a left-hand turn, went outbound, and then came in. And on the inbound, we saw these 2 helos like lift up off the airfield and go over, and like they lit up this whole mountainside.
Start engaging the enemy.
And we're like, is this really happening right now? And then
you start throwing boxes out at the enemy.
yeah, we're just like, and then we were told that the conflict was clear and to continue the approach. And so we just re-engaged the approach mode and caught the glide slope and flew down and landed, and was like, wow, that really, we really are in a war zone.
Dude, we've talked a lot about the pluses and minuses of going military versus civilian. Yeah. I'd say one of the pluses for military, you know, especially in the A-10, is if someone's trying to kill you, you can kill them back.
Right.
You don't necessarily have to just hold high, but you know, it's just a little thing. So, I mean, you do you.
There's a lot of Air Force jobs that don't really have a way to fight back either, though.
That's true.
Yeah.
Do you remember that cargo aircraft? I think it was a 747 that had a load unsecure.
Yes.
And then they had a rapid CG, so center of gravity shift, and then it crashed right after takeoff at Bagram.
Yes.
Like, do you know anything about that? Or did you get anything for, you know, because you were flying something similar? I remember that and going, man, I hope that wasn't Jessy.
It was very surreal because I had flown a lot of those missions myself where they were big in those MRAPs, which I don't remember if you remember what those were, but
oh yeah,
these big,
they're so heavy,
gigantic, like Humvee style, but we could fit 5 of them in the 747, like nose to tail, and they're so heavy, like you said. And I guess what I didn't realize at the time is we were putting a lot of faith in our load masters to make sure all those straps are secure. There's no frays in them, because what happened on that flight was, you know, one of the straps was bad, snapped, and then one of the trucks rolled back and, you know, took another one with it. That's the rapid CG shift, and you could see there's live video of that airplane.
Like pitches nose up, right?
Yeah, it pitches up real high, and then
stalls.
it stalls and just rolls over. And I was like, how many times have I done that? And just got lucky. And our loadmasters all swear, no, we check the straps, we make sure. And I'm like, I bet they did too, you know? So
yeah, it's no joke. I mean, being a loadmaster is so critical.
Yeah.
And what's crazy about it is you might be 18 years old, fresh out of tech school.
Right.
I mean, you'll get some experience, you know, talking on the military side, being a loadmaster in like a C-17 or C-130. And that entire crew is putting a lot of faith in that guy in the back and make sure he's following his tech order and doing it right.
Right.
Yeah, that was so sketchy, man. Yeah, and were you with Southern Air still at that time?
I was.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Yeah, I flew a lot of those MRAPs into Bagram, and that airline was National Air Cargo, was flying them out for some reason. So
some of the few we flew out that we didn't just hand over to the Taliban.
Right.
That's a story for another time.
Exactly.
All right, so you instead of becoming disgruntled alcoholic, you decided to move on from Southern Air. So what'd you do next?
Well, I'll tell you, I was trying for years to get out of that job. It was, I'd say, like I said, I interviewed at Hawaiian Airlines in 2012. Was kind of like the first opportunity I had to get out of there. That didn't work out for me. A year later, I interviewed with Virgin America. And during these years, on my 10 days off, I was going to a job fair as often as possible just to expose myself to some of these major airlines that I was looking to get hired with. So I was taking time out of my short...
limited time off.
Yeah, and to just show face. And I knew, like... airlines had like a point system. So like your resume counts for so many points based on, you know, your degree, your experience. And then another one was like, how many times have they met you? Have you come in? Have you got a meet and greet with a chief pilot? Have you showed up at their job fairs? And
How bad do you want it?
yeah,
Kind of thing,
yeah,
right?
it was very weird time in the industry. And they were just, it was in 2012 when they were just starting to recover from the 2009 crash and starting to hire again. So finally in 2015, I got a call back from Alaska Airlines, and they called me for an interview, and I just remember thinking, man, I better not blow this one. I had already had 2 major airline interviews that didn't go my way, and Alaska was always like number 1 on my list. They were the ones I spent the most time getting my meet and greets. I met with 2 chief pilots. I went to like 3 job fairs and talked to them face to face. And so I knew I finally had enough points, and they called me. And so I remember paying a lot of money for like an interview prep, and showed up to that interview just ready for the job, and they knew it, and hired me on the spot that day. So
How old were you at this point?
I was 35.
So that's cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know, when we talk about should you go military, should you go civilian flying, one of the major things is that hire date with a major airline, because that impacts your like everything in your quality of life going forward.
Yep.
Like when I was getting ready to retire from the Air Force, kind of the standard path is go to the airlines.
Yeah.
And I'm looking at that going, man, I don't know if I want to go be a brand new first officer in my 40s.
Right.
And looking at my kids' ages too, going, okay, they're like, you know, 6 and 9 or whatever. Do I really want to be at that low end of the seniority pile, kind of as they go through their, you know, childhood and then preteen years? But you're able to just knock all that out in your 30s. So that's got to be kind of a huge benefit.
Yeah, I mean, there's guys that have definitely done it in a quicker amount of time. It's a lot of it's timing, you know.
Oh yeah, so many economic cycles.
Yeah, like
so many factors.
The last few years, like we were in a big hiring just frenzy. I mean, they were hiring people left and right, and I mean, I know 24-year-old pilots that got hired at Alaska Airlines, and a lot of majors for that. And I just think like, man, to have an extra 10 years of seniority, you know, go through those reserve schedules at that age versus doing it at my age was it's a lot different. But yeah, they eventually it worked out for me.
So not to dig too deep into your personal finances, but for the young people who are listening and kind of maybe worried about taking on student loan for something like that, what were you able to knock out some of that debt by this time, or were you doing like minimum payments until you got on with a major?
Yeah, I remember, God, there was a lot of years where, so like the first 2 years I was at Mesa Airlines, the regional, I was making $20, $30 an hour. I was continuing going to school, working on my 4-year, my bachelor's degree, and actually taking out more debt. So I added a little bit to that, getting my undergrad. And then it was about the time I got on with Southern where I got a pay raise leaving the regional to go to that job. So I was able to kind of start chipping away at it. And then when I got furloughed, would have been in 2009, I had, you had just started or maybe finished your master's degree.
Right.
And I was like, you know what? Like when the airlines start hiring again, like having a master's is going to benefit my resume too. So I did that same program you did. So I went back to school, took out more debt, got an MBA, and just literally to throw it on my resume. But yeah, it cost me another $20,000.
Oh, damn.
Yeah. But, it might have been what got me hired earlier than someone else because, like we said, that day you get hired at the major airline job is everything in our world. It's how you get paid. It's how you bid for your schedule, how you bid for your vacation.
Right.
Um,
So if you do that, everyone's going to have their different twists and turns, but you might have to kind of just hold on to that until you get where you ultimately wanted to be.
Yeah.
And then start knocking it out.
Yeah, it's a lot different now. Like I've been telling my son, you get through this first year at the regional now is $100 every airline.
So it went from $20 to $100.
$100 an
Huge
hour.
difference.
But they also have to have that experience. Now you have to come in with 1,500 hours in an ATP. So it kind of justifies, like you're more experienced now, so you should get paid more money. But that's a livable wage, that's $100,000 a year job. From day one, we get hired at that regional. So it kind of justifies the debt a little more.
Dude, that's awesome. Like you could literally knock out all your ratings,
Yeah.
flight instruct, like go crazy for a year. I know people that have flown 1,000 hours in a year,
Yeah.
Oh
yeah. It
like
happens.
instructing.
Uh-huh.
And you could get on with a regional making $100,000
Yeah.
in your early 20s.
Yeah.
And oh, by the way, you don't even need a bachelor's degree.
Right.
Like that's not a bad path. If you like to fly and
Yeah.
you're not like, don't necessarily want to be a scholar
Yeah.
and go
I have
down
a
the
friend,
academic path.
he did it in 2 years. Career change at 40. He's just like, I want to be a pilot. And
Okay,
just
tell
went
me
all
exactly
in.
what he did, because I promise you there are people that want to do that.
Oh yeah. So basically exactly what I'm telling my son to do is go to this program. It's they call it all ATPs, and it's a year long, and it gets you from 0 hours to commercial, and then from your commercial, you get your flight instructor, and then you instruct for them for as long as it takes to get your ATP. My friend in particular was flying outside of his instructing hours and actually paying to build his hours quicker. So he was able to make that 1,500 hours in just under 2 years. And he got his first regional job. And he's now at Spirit Airlines. He's been there for, I want to say 3 years now.
So 40 years old,
Mm-hmm.
goes all in on a career change.
Yep.
2 years of really probably hard work.
Yeah.
And then he's flying for a living, making 6 figures.
Yep.
That's pretty good.
Yep.
I mean, and then the upside too, which we haven't talked about. I know it varies from airline to airline, but a major airline captain makes a lot of money. Like they can, right?
They can, for sure.
Like
for
especially if you take extra flights or this or that. I mean,
Yeah.
I like, these Air Force guys, they like to brag once they retire. Guys will text me pictures of their pay stubs.
Yeah.
I'm like, dude, you're making like $400,000 or $500,000 a year. Like this is a lucrative profession.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's guys making more than that, but they're working their tails off,
If you're hustling.
Yeah.
Like a couple of my A10 buddies were, they call them guard babies, like, straight to the guard.
Right.
And then they just go to the airlines. Like my buddy Noam got hired at Delta, I think at 28.
Yeah.
So yeah, he's like, he's going to be a 10-year captain by the time he's 38. It's just insane, right?
Yeah.
Like, and there's a lot that goes into that, of course, but that's a pretty good place to end up.
Yeah, it is. And like we said, it's like if you're coming from a rough place like me or you, the military is a great start to get that money to help you pay for flight school. Because you're not going to be able to take those loans out on your own. Like that was my thing. I had nobody to co-sign for me. So it's like, how are you going to take it? Like, I don't have any credit to start with. So it's like, I got to have something else to help me out.
Yeah.
So, that was my means to start this career. And, fortunately it worked out for me.
And it's okay to serve with your own interests in mind too.
Yeah.
Like everyone goes and serves for, patriotism, mom, apple pie, the
Right.
American flag, all that good stuff.
Yeah.
But it's okay to sit there and look at your personal situation and saying, okay, how can I use this to better myself? And there's so many positives that come with that.
Yeah.
And something I didn't realize when I enlisted is a lot of those positives are available in the Guard and Reserves with less of the downside. So
Right.
definitely worth looking into.
Yeah. And with that being said, it's, a lot of active duty jobs are unknown when you signed to go away for 4 years. Like, who knows what I'm going to end up doing? The Guard kind of gives you a dedicated path. Like, you have to test into it and say, okay, your scores allow you to do these jobs, so which one do you want? But yeah, I just recently had this conversation with a guy. He was an Army Guard guy, and he's like, he wanted to be in the infantry. He wanted to go do
Kick
that
ass,
stuff.
right?
Yeah, but he also wanted the college money, but he wanted to do it that way. But he's like, I wish more people would see it. It's like, you don't have to, you can go work in an office somewhere for the military and never see war, so it's like, it's not, I think there's a lot of like stigmatism about negative things about the military, but I don't know, I just don't see it.
Right. Yeah. It's for like you're saying, for if you like, people always ask me, hey, would you recommend people, especially as the political winds shift, you know?
Yeah.
And it's like, it seems like we're under this like oppressive, warmongers getting us involved in all these conflicts overseas all over the place.
Right.
And they're like, oh, how could you recommend somebody join under these circumstances? And I thought about it long and hard, and I realized it's like, well, one, if me telling you not to join would dissuade you, you probably weren't going to make it anyway.
Yeah.
You're probably going to find a reason to quit, and you don't have a lot of that motivation internal to yourself. And two, there's a ton of opportunities.
Yeah.
And I came out on the other end with way more than I gave, I felt like.
Yeah.
And, and I don't say that to say like, oh, I just was out for myself or anything like that. But like you said, I joined living in my car and left with an MBA, my undergrad, all my flight ratings.
Yeah.
And I could feel like I could go do whatever I wanted. So, I mean, the upside, if you take it and run with it and have a good attitude with everything you do, you can really, it can really be a huge benefit to your life.
Yeah.
But I love the idea of that path of like, boom, 2 years, you're in a paid flying position, and then you're off to the races too, right?
Totally. Yeah, it's great. Those are out there, and if you have the means to pay for that, then by all means go. But, yeah. I was just say also, like, there's a lot of things I learned from the military that kind of benefited me later in life. I want to say right from the get-go, like that whole experience with basic training really taught me that I was capable of doing basically whatever I set my mind to. And I don't really think I had that before. I was kind of like not a lot of confidence. I was like, oh, I might be able to do this. But like when I left there, I was like, I could do whatever I want.
It feels good to get some wins on the board.
Yeah.
You're like, oh, I can, the harder I work at this, the more successful I am. And you start, everything's very formulaic. So you're like, oh, if I want to be a pilot, all I have to do is X, Y, and Z. It's all spelled out for you.
There's a path.
Yeah. Sure. And I think it shows you that. And then when you go back to school, it's so much easier. You're like, I did this 24/7. And what do you mean? I go to class for 4 hours a day, and then I can.
It seems like the easiest task.
Yeah, it definitely helps you grow up.
Yeah.
Something else I want to talk about, just a little sidebar. something that's huge in your life is BJJ.
Oh, yes.
So for the audience, Jesse's a BJJ fanatic. So at some point he decided that surfing would be secondary to strangling people. So like, how did this come about?
I want to say, so I dabbled with jiu-jitsu for a little bit when I was living in Hawaii.
Oh, and sorry, not to interrupt again, but I think the very first time we met, I was like cutting weight for wrestling.
Oh, yes.
And you thought I was a complete psychopath.
That's true. You probably were a little bit at that point.
So it's kind of funny that you also became a grappler.
I envied you though. I always wanted to wrestle in high school, and I always wanted to know how to be able to toss people as easily as you would at the beach. Just like throw me around in this.
Oh, get out of here.
It was kind of funny. But yeah, so yeah, I tried it for the first time living in Hawaii, and I immediately fell in love. First class, first day. The culture in there was very similar to surfing in the sense that there is a hierarchy, like the black belt is, he's the guy at the top of the lineup. He's going to take every set wave kind of thing.
Sure.
To like the brand new white belt. But like, man, once you join that family, like you were all in, and you were and being in Hawaii was a very hard place to like kind of break into the surfing culture a little bit, because I'm
You're a haole.
white guy, the haole boy. Like I can't take any waves. But once I had some jiu-jitsu friends, like all of a sudden it was like, oh, here's Jesse. Like I trained with him, like, let him have this one. It was kind of so that was a really cool part of it. But then starting to learn to like, they'd like take me under their wing, and, because I was smaller than most of those guys, and they'd teach me little things like, build these frames, get my weight off of you. And these are some big Samoan dudes telling me how to like get out from underneath them. Like that's kind of a big skill to learn. So yeah, I fell in love with it right away. But kind of just dabbled with it for quite a few years. Surfing was still number one for a long time. And with my job being gone 20 days at a time, I could only, train a little bit here and there. It wasn't until I started at Alaska Airlines, and I flew with this captain who was he was a purple belt at the time, and it just came up out of nowhere. He's talking about his son like training for some MMA camp or something, and he's like, "Oh yeah, I do jiu-jitsu," and I'm like, "Oh man, like I used to do jiu-jitsu a little bit here and there." He's like, "Oh, you should go back, like try it," like, and I'm like, yeah, I think I'm in a good place. Like in my career, like I finally landed my major airline job. I've got a schedule that I can kind of manipulate a little better. And so yeah, I found a gym and I started training. So that was about 10 years ago. I've been with Alaska 10 years. So I feel like I've been training jiu-jitsu for about 10 solid years. And yeah, I just got my brown belt a few months back, and life is good.
Dude, that's awesome. It seems like you've like integrated it really well with your airline profession, because I know I've seen like photos on the gram, things like that of like you training in this gym and that gym, and
it's one of my
tournaments
favorite things.
all over the place.
Yeah. Nothing better than having a layover and finding a jiu-jitsu gym and just dropping in and kind of getting a feel for, that's one thing, like training in the same school day after day. It's like you get to know how everybody kind of rolls. Mm-hmm. And so you understand like what they're trying to do. Like you almost second guess them all the time. Like, oh, he's going to try and do this to me again or something, other than the black belt who's always 10 steps ahead of you, no matter what, because he's been training you since day one. But yeah, I love to go drop into new gyms wherever I'm at on a layover and kind of train with some new guys and feel like what's working for me, what's not, and bring that back. I learned stuff from other people that like I may have not learned here, and then I'll bring that kind of techniques back home, and so it's a lot of fun.
That's cool. Well, Jesse, I think this probably won't be the last time we talk. It's pretty cool that live here with the same friends we've had our whole lives.
Yeah.
We're still surfing together, still hanging out. You know, me, you, Mike, Jake, like that whole crew. I mean, not many people still have the same friends they had when they were 15. So I say we're blessed.
Definitely.
But also, you're behind the cameras and helping me out with this entire endeavor, which I appreciate.
Yeah.
So, man, thanks for doing this, dude. Wish you all the success. I think you provided a ton of like valuable information, and I thought it was really cool just spelling out how you did it and how other people could make that happen.
Right.
Because I've even had people, I've mentioned it on X, you know, like, hey, you realize you don't need a degree to become an airline pilot,
Right.
and you can do it in 2 years. But people are like, man, really? Like, I don't think they realize that actually is a possibility.
Yeah.
And you just provided examples and spelled it out. So,
and
you
can come from, anywhere. Like you said, the trust fund kid to the, it's going to be a little bit more of a struggle, but if you apply yourself and really, I guess the advice I give my son, is he gets overwhelmed easy looking at the big picture, but it's literally a daily grind, and you just kind of complete one task at a time. Don't look too far ahead. Just keep on the path, doing one thing every day, making yourself better. And eventually one day you're going to look up and you're there. So that's my advice for anybody wanting to do this or pursue anything in life. I think that's kind of the path.
Absolutely. Jessy Holmberg, great talking to you. Thanks for doing it, bro.
All right. Thanks, Dale. It's good to have you.